In this lesson series, we'll take a look at the construction of memories. We'll encounter three main concepts: system consolidation, neuron allocation, and synaptic plasticity. Now, we can look at human memory from a variety of perspectives. At the system level, we're interested in how memories may be stored across multiple brain regions. In future lessons, we'll encounter the concept of allocation and plasticity. First, a quick definition of what is memory. Memory is the capacity of an organism to acquire, store, and recover information based on experience. And we've identified two kinds of memory: episodic memories and semantic memories. Episodic memories include the circumstances of learning. So the event that you're episodically remembering has lots of context: where it happened, when it happened, lots of details, and it's vivid. We use words like "I remember when this happened," or "I can relive that episode." Semantic memory refers to the storage of all kinds of general information about the world, what was learned from all of our learning episodes. And we use words like "I know this." So in the case of an amoeba in paramecia in microscopes, the episodic memory would include: you remember the classroom and the microscope you were using, you remember what was going on when you were learning about these little microscopic organisms, whereas the semantic memory would be the facts about the amoeba and the paramecia. So that's the stuff that you learned. That's the semantic memory, whereas the details of the circumstances of learning would be included in the episodic memory. Now, the two forms of memory are related. We've seen that sometimes we forget the context and the details of the learning episode, but we retain the information that was learned. So in this way, episodic memories provide the information, provide the content of what's going to be stored in semantic memory. And in fact, oftentimes we lose these circumstances of learning, but we retain the information that was learned. Sometimes we can remember both the episodic memory of that learning event and what was learned. Now, scientists have gathered evidence that long-term memories, many kinds of long-term memories, are stored in the cerebral cortex. This is the outer layer of the brain, relatively larger in humans than lots of other animals. Now, the cortex, you see all these words here indicating that different regions of the cortex are performing different jobs, different functions. And while it is true that the posterior part of the cortex seems to be involved in processing information about what is happening in the environment, we have visual cortex here and touch cortex and auditory cortex. So the brain is sort of making a model of what's happening in the environment, and the front part of the brain seems to be involved in processing what should be done based on the circumstances and one's values and so on. While it is true that the different parts of the brain may be performing different functions, it's also true that scientists think that memories are written or stored to lots of widespread, diverse areas of the cortex. So we want to think of this outer surface of the brain as a large capacity, long-term memory system, in addition to performing dedicated jobs, as you see with the words on the surface of the brain. Now, the word memory is written down here just in the temporal lobe here. So again, that is a simplification. We don't mean to suggest that memory is only stored in this location in the left hemisphere of the brain. Scientists think memories are stored in more distributed networks around the brain. But it is true that the temporal lobe is an important part of the brain for memory processing. And in fact, underneath the temporal lobe is a very important structure indeed. It's called the hippocampus. So here we see a cutaway of the cortex, and we can see underneath the temporal lobe is a structure called the hippocampus. Here we see a cut through a preserved brain, and this region here would be the hippocampus. And in this picture, that part of the brain has been stained with a purple dye, and we can see tiny little purple things here. Those would be hippocampal brain cells, or neurons. Now, scientists know the hippocampus is critically involved in memory because of unfortunate patients like HM. So he is a neurological patient that was living in the 50s, and he had severe epilepsy. So he had seizures that were incapacitating him. And surgeons at the time thought, well, maybe we'll just take out the brain regions that they think were causing the seizures. And as it turned out, they suspected that the bottom part of the temporal cortex on each side, including the hippocampus, was the site of the seizures. So they removed this area bilaterally. Now, surprisingly, when H.M. recovered from surgery, he had normal short-term memory, sometimes called working memory. He could hold a conversation, and that requires that, he could remember what was just said to him and what he just said. He had intact semantic memory, where word meanings and other basic information about the world is stored. So he knew words in his language, English, and he knew general information about the world. So he had access to these long-term memories in semantic memory. And he had no other perceptual problems, and his IQ remained the same. So it seemed that intact were lots of psychological qualities, even though large portions of his brain were removed. However, he did have a profound memory disturbance. He had an episodic memory disturbance. He could not make new memories of events in his life. He could not learn new facts about the world like intact people could. And H.M. could not convert episodes into new episodic memories, and neither could he add new knowledge to his semantic memory. And scientists refer to that as anterograde amnesia, so he couldn't make new memories. We can display H.M.'s memory disturbance using this diagram. The arrow would indicate the moment that he had the surgery. Afterwards, he could not make new episodic memories, but neither could he make new semantic memories. He couldn't learn about the world because it's episodic memories that provide the content for semantic memories. But we said he had normal semantic retrieval, so he could retrieve basic information about the world. He could have a conversation, so he had access to stored words, the meanings of words, English words, for example. Interestingly, H.M. did seem to be able to describe episodes in his early life, his life as a child. And so it seemed on the surface that he was retrieving episodic memories. So he could remember, for example, the stock market crash, or taking banjo lessons, or shooting target practice in the woods, or going roller skating as a child. This, by the way, is H.M. as a boy around 1930. So it seemed that he was also able to retrieve episodic memories from remote times. But this was controversial because psychologists were intrigued by the way he described those childhood events. And the question arose, were his remote memories really vivid, detailed, and context-specific? In other words, was he sort of reliving those childhood experiences? And some psychologists said, no, he wasn't. It was rather he was sort of describing them like they were semantic memories, just facts about his earlier self, that he used to do this or do that, or he liked this or that. He wasn't sort of having that lived experience that we associate with episodic memories. So this remained controversial, but certainly he had access to semantic memory, and he had a semantic version of his past episodic memories as well. Now you'll notice there's a gap here in this diagram. So again, the arrow was the time of surgery, can't make new memories, episodic or semantic, seems to have good retrieval for remote semantic memories and possibly remote episodic memories. But what's this gap here? Well, what scientists did was they started to ask H.M. whether he knew about recent events in the world. And they asked him questions about episodes that happened at progressively more distant times in the past. And they found an interesting pattern. The pattern they found was that H.M. showed amnesia in a gradient-like fashion. Events that occurred recently, he had difficulty retrieving. He did not know about recent events in the world. But when they asked about events farther back in time, he was better able to retrieve information about those events. And then again, these are questions about world events, so they were sort of assessing semantic knowledge. It suggested that recent information was undergoing some kind of processing. And it takes time for this processing to occur to transform the memory into a state where you don't need your hippocampus to retrieve it. So it seemed like the brain tissue that was removed was important in transforming recent memories into remote memories, and that process took time. And today, psychologists describe this as a window of consolidation. So HM goes down as one of the most important neurological patients in history. The obvious inference from his case was that the removed brain tissue was critical for consolidating memories, transforming recently learned information into long-term memories. We can sort of diagram that relationship here. We see two boxes. One would be the hippocampal system, down underneath the temporal lobe, and then the neocortical system. This would be the cerebral cortex. And scientists began to suspect that what happens when we have an episode, when we learn something, that'll be the initial storage. Both the hippocampus and the cortex are processing that information, but it's the hippocampus that makes some sort of stronger memory of the event. The memory in the cortex is sort of weak at this stage. And then, over time, the hippocampus is somehow going to communicate with the cerebral cortex to store the memory in a stronger way in the cerebral cortex. We're going to call that consolidation. In fact, we'll call it system consolidation because it's involving multiple regions of the brain. So system consolidation is the post-encoding reorganization of long-term memory over distributed brain circuits. In this case, the hippocampal system and the whole surface of the cortex. And at this stage, scientists suspected perhaps what's going on here is the brain is transforming the memory from a system where memories decay quickly to a memory system where the memories decay more slowly. And so this is the normal processing of information, and storage of memory involves this communication between these two brain regions. We can elaborate on system consolidation. It's the process whereby dynamic interactions between the hippocampus and the cortex allow the hippocampus to signal the cortex to store a stronger version of the memory in the long-term memory system. Metaphorically, the hippocampus teaches the cortex to make hippocampal independent memories. And the memory is stored in those cortical regions originally activated by the experience. So without a hippocampus, HM was not able to store any new long-term memories from all of the episodes of his life. So neither could he make episodic memories, but neither could he learn new information, just basic facts about the world. So he couldn't add to his semantic memory either. So we need a functioning hippocampus then to make new memories. So to wrap this lesson up then, at the system level, we have memory being processed by multiple brain regions. And in fact, memories seem to be transformed as these brain regions communicate over time.